Picture this. You've been stuck in lift lines all morning, watching untouched snow just beyond that resort boundary. That night, you finally break. You look into backcountry gear on your laptop, only to get hit with a bunch of sticker shock. Or maybe you've already made the leap and the investment, only to catch an edge in your tech bindings and blow out your knee because your setup didn't release properly. If either of those hit home, this episode today is for you. I was joined by Chris Trunek, co-founder of Daymaker Touring, the company making ski touring more accessible, more affordable, and a whole lot safer. In this first of two Pattern Innovation podcast episodes with Chris, we talk about the story behind Daymaker Touring, the engineering behind their products, and how clever hacks like smartphone photogrammetry helped them build one of the most innovative ski adapters on the market. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this interview with Chris Trunek and Daymaker Touring. Hey everybody. So for anybody currently listening on Spotify, listening to this interview with Chris as a podcast, I highly recommend that you switch over to YouTube and watch this interview live. You'll just get the most out of the experience. Chris screen shared probably half of the time in this first interview and more than half of the time in the second one. So that is something that I would recommend up front. If not, you're still going to have a great conversation. Chris was an awesome interview, and I'm excited for you guys to get inside his brain and inside Daymaker Touring. So yeah. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Powder Innovation Podcast. My name is Colton Berry, founder of Powder Innovation, here today and excited to introduce Chris Trunek. He is the co-founder of a company called Daymaker Touring, which creates touring adapters so you can use regular ski boots to tour the backcountry. So super excited to have Chris with us here today. And Chris, maybe you could share who you are, your journey into skiing, and co-found Daymaker.
Yeah, well, glad to be here. Thanks for having me again, Colton. We kind of tried to do this a little bit ago, and it was a little less than successful. I'm just working on getting set up here, so it was a little early. But yeah, my name's Chris. I am one of the partners in Daymakers. Daymaker Touring is myself and Giray Didali, essentially, and a good crew of assistants and supporters and stuff like that, but we're the two guys that kind of make it all happen. And yeah, we've been doing it now for at least 10 years, which is hard to believe. And I'm actually right now, I'm just back in my hometown, Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and I grew up out here, but I've spent the last 15 years out in Salt Lake. I moved out there in 2010, and yeah, it was a pretty awesome experience. Got to spend a lot of time out there with all my buds. Everybody kind of moved out there at the same time. I kind of grew up here. There's like these winky-dink little ski resorts, and it was all like all-terrain park. And so got into that stuff right when like the first skis and 1260s were coming out. And that was kind of like, I remember like, seeing the first dude ski backwards on our hill. And I was like, what the hell is that? So that was kind of like where I decided I was getting into freestyle skiing and stuff. And yeah, that was kind of my thing. Was chasing around all those Ohio freestyle kids, which was like a little group of guys that Kyle Becker was kind of heading up, and he's the filmer behind Good Company and has made quite a name for himself in the industry. But he was definitely somebody who was real influential for me. Like, skiing in Ohio, there really wasn't like any pathway to anything with it. It was like drink beer at night and go slide down some ice. So, they were doing like real stuff, and it was like pretty inspiring. Like, oh, you can actually do something with skiing even being in Ohio. And went to school for industrial design at Ohio State, and that was kind of like, I really wanted to get out west. There really wasn't good design programs out there, at least not anywhere with like good skiing. California had a bunch, but I really wanted to be in Utah. So anyway, stuck it out to Ohio State. But during that time, I blew my knee out really bad. I've always kind of had, my knee's just shot. It's like not good. And it's kind of always been a thing for me, and kind of was what led me to steer slightly away from just like trying to ski as hard as I could into trying to develop product and stuff like that, because I felt like, and I could have more impact like on that side of things than I'd be able to have trying to ski with a bum knee, where like every time you land a jump slightly wrong, it would like, that was it, that was the end of the day. So kind of a bitch, but you make the best of it, and here we are. So that's kind of my background, and that's kind of how I got into skiing. It led me to doing all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And I know we both talked about having engineering backgrounds and not really ending up in the industry that like our respective colleges would put us in. So yeah, I'm curious. Then you want to like, it seems from what I remember, you're almost like a serial designer / serial entrepreneur. Daymaker wasn't your first kind of venture into the ski space. Yeah, maybe walk us through that path of, you're doing design work at Ohio State. I know you like created and designed different like skateboards growing up. Like what was the progression like from like your early days to where you are at Daymaker today?
Yeah, so I was always like really crafty. My mom was very crafty. My parents are both like DIYers. So picked up a lot of that skill. I remember being introduced to design via like actually my grandma's neighbor. She's in Cleveland here, so I gotta like reach out to her and go find her because she was pretty cool. But she was a graphic designer and it had all sorts of really cool projects, and it just kind of was like mind blowing. Whoa, design! This is like this whole thing that's like not just normal stuff. It was like so esoteric, and kind of drew into that kind of stuff. And even as a like young kid, I was like real into like origami and super into Legos. I still have still really into Legos. I use Legos for prototyping, rapid prototyping stuff like all the time. Still, it's hilarious, but it works. And so I was always into that kind of stuff. And then paper airplanes and model rockets. Like before I found skiing, I was kind of like, I'm still a nerd, but like I was like real nerdy, and it was like, just that kind of stuff. Got involved with skiing, like I saw, hey, twin tip, this is like real cool, or something you can do with skiing besides just like go down a 200-foot hill over and over again. Keep it interesting, and so got real into skiing, and then like, just at that same time, like everything, little 14-year-old running around starting to try to like get aggro and everything, and I was like, again, out here in the country, so like skateboarding, there's no smooth concrete anywhere out here still to this day. So you couldn't just like ride your especially back then, like skateboards had little wheels and it was like impossible to ride a skateboard here. So I got into like longboarding, with like big fat wheels and everything. I was building longboards and cruising around all the hills down here. And, I started just building them from day one. I never owned one, and I store bought one. And so I was like, a little kid hacking stuff out. But like they were sick. Like I wish I had some of the pictures. I have pictures here of a lot of them, but like, man, the first couple ones I built were like, some little kid with like, I don't know how I did it, but it was pretty cool. It was like really well shaped and everything. And so the longboard stuff is really where I started to like build things that then I could like go ride on. And it was more than just like a toy or something like that. And every time I would build a skateboard, I would like, okay, I gotta learn some new shit. I gotta like try fiberglassing. I gotta, try a drop through, all that kind of stuff. But like I just made it a goal of like each one to like try to push my skills, and I learned a lot through doing that stuff. Like it's very educational, and then that kind of progressed and got to a point where it was like I was selling a couple boards, but I didn't know what I was doing, and so sold some boards. They were cool, didn't make any money. And then kind of was out here at that point and started to like transition into building skis. And so, I have here, I can just go to my little screen share thing here that we have set up, and I can show you guys just some of the just some quick visuals. Let me pull this back up here. So here, I'm going to go up here. So like, here's some of these early skateboards if you can see them. So like, this is one that I started, like this is pretty, at this point I kind of knew what I was doing a little bit. The first ones are real janky, just like hardwood store plywood and stuff like that. And so started doing carbon fiber work, and, built like a production kind of mold that I could vacuum bag these in. And a couple different shapes that would fit in the same mold profile. It was like going so far as like laying up like whole visuals and CAD for stuff like this, and you know.
And was this when you created like this first mold, started working with carbon fiber? Was this in college or was this before?
This board I started to design. I designed this board in college because I built this one in like my college house. So this one I built in high school, this black one. College, and this was out in Utah here. I was building these ones. That shop was in Utah, but like this first prototype I had in Ohio right before I left. So yeah, college, high school time frame. And then here I can kind of like get you into all the ski building stuff. So like here's a bunch of images of like some. This is like our early ski building stuff. So this is Dickie Stiza here. He now owns Ninth Word Skis. He was always he was helping me out a lot back then. And so we would just like build our skis in like this vacuum bag, and it doesn't even work very good at altitude because you have less atmospheric pressure. But to work with, you know, and this is like you would take this and put this in an autoclave if you were doing this for real, you know, and had a budget. This is like these. This is what I would do. This worked really good. I would just hack the compressor out of an old refrigerator. I did this multiple times, and that's a good vacuum pump. And you can hook a hose up to it, and it'll pull a vacuum just like $100 pump from Harbor Freight. So
That's
you know
awesome.
we were like I'm still to this day like the cheapest mofo out there. You know
Yeah, where are you guys making that ski? Is that like in a
this.
garage or basement?
Oh yeah, this is our garages. These are all garages. Yeah, so these are various houses that we lived at in Salt Lake, but man, I squished my images. They got all squished. They got a little distorted here. I guess my file was a little. It was laggy, so when I went to squish these down and compress them, it must have let go of the shift key. But anyway, I was building skis. Ended up building a full-blown press like this. That was a whole story. It's not really super relevant to this conversation.
But you built it though?
Yeah, I got hired to build it, and so I had access to it. And at the same time, I was building this, and it was like associated with the guy who I was buying and sourcing longboard hardware from, and it got a little, you know, the bit like I kind of say the takeaway from this whole situation was like get stuff in writing, you know, because I like documented everything super clearly, and we had a basic little contract, and there were some disagreements, and that paperwork, that paper trail is like what allowed us to, you know, resolve it without getting like, you know, not. You don't want to like take
Yep.
stuff to court or be like you know, anything like that. It was just like kind of seeing things from slightly different sides, and having that agreement is like was super clutch to making it not turn into a disaster. So yeah, so that was our press. Like here's like some pretty cool sketches I did back then. And this is all on my website here too. I'm trying to get that all put together. These are old, but you know, I was just looking at trying to build skis that like were a little bit more durable and
Yeah.
mechanically bound together. Uh, and you know, stuff works and doesn't work. That's the thing is like you start trying stuff and all of a sudden things that seem like they would work are massively challenging. And man, all my images got so squished it looks silly. These aren't ski boards, but you know that was the ski. I ended up building that ski that's in this picture like that, and it was like the biggest endeavor ever. It took me all summer to build them, and then I broke them like the third day out. It was a real, you know, it was that's the reality of this stuff though. That's how it goes. So yeah, and there's like, you know, I was like kind of doing this kind of paint work and stuff, and but yeah, so around the time I was building skis, we started working with like Emmett and Kale, and you know, the two original guys behind Vishnu, and I was kind of like third member. We don't really. We kind of had some disagreements that ended up with all kind of splitting ways, and you know we're cool now. Everything's chill now, but it was a little, you know, young. Everybody's kind of hot headed about everything, and
Sure. Yeah.
but you know it's what it is. It's all water under the bridge, and I'm stoked to see Vishnu, you know, still doing their thing. But yeah, I helped Emmett like vectorize this logo and turn it into, you know, that thing. And one thing I always kind of like I like to point out is like this is like something that we always made a point with Vishnu is like, yeah, black bases, die cut, And, black base is just so much faster than any kind of graphic base. And the die cut is repeated on every ski. So, like, the tooling cost on that die cut has been, absorbed over every ski they've produced and saved them a lot of costs. And those are, like, the decisions that allowed Vishnu to be, like, a affordable brand, Or at least one little insight. I mean, I was involved in the prototype and, early stage stuff like that. And then they all, Vishnu's success is Kale's. God, I always is Emmett's doing. It's those guys took the ball and ran and did it. So I'm stoked to see that. Yeah, involved at the front end of things. So, but yeah, we after we kind of went our separate ways, I was like really without anything, and it was like, man, I gotta do something. I don't want to I don't want to go back. I went back and delivered subs on Jimmy John's, on my bike because I didn't have a car. I had a truck, and at the time, Kale and I were driving back with ski mold material, like big, huge sheets of MDF in the back of my truck, and I ran a stop sign that I couldn't see. It was like behind and I T-boned some Tahoe. We got all busted up, and so I didn't have a car, and then we very shortly thereafter dissolved all that, and so I didn't have a car, didn't have any kind of a business, and then I got laid off. I was working at Jan's up in Park City at the time, and so I got laid off, and so it was like, holy smokes, what just happened? And so I was going back through all the drawings here. I mean, I gotta zoom in. I'm spilling the beans on the next things here. Here, I'll stop sharing. So, yeah, anyway, so at that point, though, I didn't really have anything going on, and I was like, man, I gotta do something, and I was looking through all my just old files of random drawings and sketches, what can I do with any of these? And yeah, because before that I had done a couple. I'm working on getting all my old projects, even ones that failed and didn't go well, up in my portfolio. And I'm trying to kind of tell the story of what happened and stuff. So it's kind of educational. But yeah, I had some failures, and then Vishnu had almost been a thing that was working for me, and so it was what am I gonna do? And so I went back to my drawings and looking through, and then I had these concepts for this idea of a Daymaker, essentially is what it was, but I didn't call it that back then, and it was just this crappy sketch. I probably have. Let me zoom in here on the correct area, and I will go back to presenting. So yeah, so anyway, so then it was okay, what am I gonna do? And so I started messing around and had, because we all had Alpine trackers back in the day, which I'll pull up a picture here, so I want to give proper credit where credit is due, because these were the original, let's see, do you see that Google window there?
I don't.
Okay, here. I'm not sharing. Well, we can pull in a picture of an Alpine tracker here, but they had some issues that I wanted to try to resolve, and so started messing around in SolidWorks at the time with something like this, and then ended up taking it and doing. These were the original prototypes. I found the pictures I was looking for.
Awesome.
Yeah, I went and scoured the old archives to get a bunch of these images together. And so these are aluminum channel, plywood, Alpine tracker parts. Were this is the frame of an Alpine tracker that I just hacked together. And then this was even this is a fit thing that I was trying. It was I was trying, because so what I was trying to do with here is okay, first validate that this motion even works, because and again, this motion system I developed with Legos, first at little tiny Legos, but then I literally built a life-sized Lego prototype thing that would fill the void of a ski binding, and just kind of make sure that I was on the right path with the linkage layout. And because this linkage, for anybody that's not familiar with our products, is inspired by mountain bike suspension, and I have a picture here of it's on our website, but it's a cool little picture, but it's lost someplace. But mountain bike suspensions and car suspensions for that matter, they're using links to change motion paths and control what exactly an object is doing as it's being moved around in space. And so one of the problems with making an alpine adapter that is compatible with everything is that you've got really wildly different footprints of ski bindings. Binding like an FKS versus a Solomon binding or something with like a lower profile heel and a big wraparound toe. They're very different.
Mm-hmm.
And accommodating that kind of and then you put a boot in there with that limited volume and you want it to get as low as possible. And this 4-bar linkage, not only, it ended up being very ergonomic, but it was originally intended to move the boot back and around the toe lug so that it could, because if you look at a Daymaker, the way it sits, there's not really any place to put a pivot point, where the boot ideally should be sitting. And so that 4-bar tech allowed us to relocate the pivot, and not only that, it puts the pivot in the ball of your foot. So it's a pretty massive improvement. But these pictures here, this is like this is from 2014, these pictures. And so, here you can see that little prototype there.
Yeah.
And so I took it up to Brighton, though, and it was like, wow, this, it actually worked. It worked really good. It worked better than the Trekkers that I had. And so I was like, all right, dang, that's pretty sick. And the timeline of all this with what had been going on with fishing, I don't know exactly what it all was, a long time ago, but so I okay, this is an idea, and I had those prototypes, and, originally I was calling them stairways, like some Led Zeppelin stuff, but, I had these, they're pretty bad, but, these are, these early models, and so, this is that wood block. I was trying to just, get away from a lug altogether, because the goal with this is, man, how can I make these things cheaply, because, making molds and tooling and all that stuff is so expensive, and so I was like, okay, if I design this thing that it can be, just water jet or laser jet profiles of metal, and then, make them on a press brake, I could produce them without any tooling. And that was the big insight I was trying to chase. It's no tooling. So you see these bales are silly, they're just all bent. And so these are these first concept kind of things. And so I had these prototypes and was I was showing them to a lot of people back then. Hey, what do you think of this idea? And, people see this and they're like, what the hell are you showing me? This is go put that in the recycling bin, And then, but then I, crossed paths with Giray, who I kind of, knew, but it wasn't we were, I guess at that point we were probably we were he worked at Jan's, I worked at Jan's, but he was always out there filming and skiing and stuff, and I was in the sales and tuning and stuff like that. And so, we'd see each other and got to know each other, and eventually be hey, let's, we ended up living together kind of at the same time that we were gonna start working on this together. And so, when I showed this to Giray, he was like, dude, that's freaking it. I just got stuck out in Wolverine Cirque. He's got this crazy story where he had a boot pack out thousands of feet through chest deep snow because his tracker broke and he was stuck. And so it was he's never doing that again, And so when he saw this, it was oh, that's sick, and let's try to do this. And so we were let's try to do it. And so we started just, working when we could, moonlight it, and kind of start building everything out. And so, here's some kind of just some sketches and stuff. Sorry, I'm going too fast. But then I had these pair made. I had these water jet, and you can see they were made to that same kind of standard, and I 3D printed the parts and stuff. And this is kind of when we went public for the first time with Daymakers. And this thing was cool looking, but it had some issues for sure. Namely, snow buildup on this hexagon pattern just didn't work. It just bent the hell out of this top deck because it was the snow on the bottom of your boot didn't have any. It wouldn't go through there. So that was kind of hey, snow buildup and everything on this kind of a product is a really big design challenge. But yeah, that was the first one we made, and this thing cost $700 to get these things folded up. And not only that, but I went back to that company, I won't say their name, but I was I showed up, I got CAD files that are perfect, ready to put on the machine. Man, no one ever drops us off files that are this ready to go, I'm okay, paid them the same day I showed up and everything.
Yeah.
Like, here's $700, turn the file on the machine, get your money. And they wouldn't even, like, no one wanted to do this kind of work, especially out in Salt Lake. It's all, it's all defense contractors. And so, like, stuff like this is just, they're even stuff like that where it's like free money, essentially. They just don't even care because it's so small in the grand scheme of, like, their, $1 million military budgets and stuff. But, so, that was kind of like disheartening because we were trying to make them in the States. That was like a whole other thing. And so, just didn't work. No one wanted to make them. And so then we made this one here because at that same time with the design jobs I was working, I ended up in China and got to meet factories over there and went to like visit some really cool factories and got some really great contacts. So we pivoted and like, hey, dude, let's do this there. And everybody was like super, I mean, I got nothing but good things to say about the experiences working with folks over there. But, we made this. This is our first production Daymaker. And again, it's like that minimum viable concept, minimum viable product concept. It's like as sheet metal as possible. We CNC these lugs and all these parts. And oh my God, they were so heavy.
Bike.
Yeah, there's that bike picture I was looking for. Yeah. But, we sold 50 of them. We made 50 of them and we sold 50 of them. And if anybody out there is listening who had these Daymakers, just please get in touch. We'll set you up with something better. But, they proved the point that people were interested in this product. And we didn't have to like, we sold them and made our money back. And then it was like, all right, we got something here. And at that point, we got some money together, and we have one silent partner in the business who is kind of our initial investor, and got a lump sum together that we could go fund molds in China at the factories that we had just, established connections with. And then we got, what is essentially the current version of the Daymaker, although it's been refined quite a bit. There's a lot of changes that have happened over the years that are subtle. But this is the very first kind of prototype version. These are all 3D printed pieces. They are not 3D printed in production, which is sometimes something I hear as a misunderstanding. But, this one, I think, I don't recall off the top of my head, but it was probably something, because we made production tooling. There was like 10 tools that make all these sheet metal parts too, for each part. So there's a whole lineup of tooling that makes every single component here, right? And then molds. So it's, it was like $60,000 in tooling, which is actually pretty low cost for something like this. We get the samples back out of the molds first time we're over there in China, and like, boom, stuff's breaking in half. Like, nope, And this is proven to be kind of the one Achilles heel of this product, but it was, it was like not even. It was just like you dropped them on the ground and it broke. And there was some other stuff here. I don't know what we did to bend this, but we ended up bending some top decks, and but what it ended up being.
What are we looking at right there?
This is so this is black, but this is the first mold sample for these links. So this.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, they're black. And so what we ended up doing is like really changing the formulation and tweaking the formulation that the plastic itself is made out of, and that improved the durability significantly.
Interesting, because originally you said it was 3D printed, it wasn't produced like that. I remember, like us in our last conversation, you had some challenges around like mass production and changing the design a little bit. Is this what you were referring to?
Well, so when I say design, I mean like the core files here. Like if you see the overall layout of some of these parts, like it's just fundamentally different, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of like the current Daymaker Classic is what we call it now. The design is essentially unchanged. It's been updated and refined, and like we've removed certain cutouts that were causing problems and added, other things here or there, or changed some, made some mold modifications over the years. So there's been stuff like that was refinements. But yeah, so when we first made these, so this would be, this is like a photo grade prototype, right? Like, you could probably go walk on this, but we never walked on this one as like a, user, like I would never spend the effort to like finish a 3D print to this quality especially back then. This is 10 years ago. Printers were not as good, so it was like that would never been worth it to finish it just to go test. So this was more like a visual prototype. But then you go to production, you get mold samples, you make a lot of adjustments, and then you kind of figure out the recipe for, because each part's a little different, and then you run your production. And so all of the parts on our Daymaker that you buy, especially right now, are all injection molded production parts. But as we went through our process and ran years of these things, we did end up, we 3D printed a lot, probably 10,000 or so of these pieces that we call bale keepers. And it was just one of these things that we came up with on the, after using these things, like, man, it was really hard to flip the tow bale up over your boot. And so we made these little contraptions that it's just like a little rubber tab. It worked really good to keep everything in place, and it was cheaper to make them on the printer than it was to go buy molds, and so that's what we did. So that part has always been 3D printed up until recently. So anyway, I just got a bunch of pictures here. I figured it'd be cool process pictures because one of the things that this conversation I'd like to kind of put out there is this stuff doesn't ever, this is what I do, right? And this stuff doesn't get out. It doesn't, it doesn't ever see the light of day until maybe something like this, 10 years down the line, where we're kind of looking at it retroactively. And that's always just kind of been a frustrating thing for me as a designer. And that's kind of one of the things too with my just path as a designer is man, just reducing and that's why I started to wanted to do a business, is working with other people's, lead and just being forced to do what they wanted to do. And I'm man, we could do this better. And never being able to really take the reins. I was always only being able to look at one segment of the overall problem and product experience and, that kind of thing. It was just always so segmented. I'm man, if I could look at the whole picture, I could do better work. And so that was why I wanted to start a business. So yeah, and so I just gathered all these images that I thought were kind of cool development pictures that you just never really would see. They're not but yeah, so I'll just kind of breeze through them real quick. Here's a bunch of just stuff from the Tekdapter development, because after we got the Classic, obviously we moved into this Tekdapter, which we came out within the last couple of years. That introduces the pin compatibility with pin boots. There was an adapter that was kind of, I didn't show it in here because you might still do something along those lines, but it was kind of it's kind of the loss adapter that we put a lot of effort into developing, but it just ultimately was too expensive, so we never did it. And so that was quite a setback, honestly, because we spent a lot of time and money developing something that we never produced. And so the Tekdapter took a long time to produce too. But
real quick, just in case, for those unfamiliar, so you guys have two main products. It's the Daymaker Classic that you've been describing.
Yeah, here, these guys right here, I'll pull them up.
And then the Tekdapters.
Yep. So we got the Daymaker Classic, and if you go to our website, it'll give you the full demo on how these work. But,
yeah.
And hopefully, if they're watching our interview, they'll at least a little bit from there. But yeah, those are the two products that we currently make and sell. But yeah, you only ever see the polished side of everything, and so this is kind of just the nitty gritty that leads up to it. And it's just this piece here on the Tekdapter, this elevator system, took a ton of work to design and prototype, and we did so much field testing with this. We tested so many 3D printed variants of things. That product's sweet. It just some of the issues that we now know about with our Classic that are just maybe things that are, hey, it's expensive to make it this way, or we could have made it better like this. It's the Tekdapter is really just a much better thing. And this is a cool sketch I was but I never was able to really do anything with it or show it. But it was I was looking at the idea of a fully a 3D printed compliant mechanism based thing that would as you stepped it into the ski binding, it would collapse it front to back and pull the pins inward. And
oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so it'd be like per size, so you wouldn't have any adjustability. It'd be just like, what's your boot sole length, and print it the size. And so a little far out for Daymakers, but
Yeah.
like here's some other cool 3D printed stuff. These are like tools that we use all the time when we set up people's adapters and stuff. It's a size jig, and so they give us our boot sole length, because that was ultimately something that we learned with our Classic, is that they're kind of a pain to set the sizing, hence why the Tekdapters are so much easier. And so we figured it would just be easier to set them up for folks. And so we made these jigs and, made a whole bunch of them that everybody could use. And it worked great, And so these things are still floating around. They've never broken. They've been dropped all over the place. So they're totally, totally burly. And, that's how you take a photo like that in the top of a freaking camper shell, you know.
Awesome. Man, that's so cool.
So anyway, yeah. So with the Tekdapter, we also got real into like 3D scanning, and that was like game changing. Because like I said, the constraints of trying to design an adapter around all the various ski bindings is super difficult. And so when we started off the Tekdapter, we 3D scanned like all the bindings. There's more stuff here and a bunch of boots, and got everything aligned in CAD, and have built up a pretty nice repository of scan files of the different bindings out there, which is really helpful. Because like if you look on this Tekdapter, like in specifically the Solomon STH line of bindings,
Yep.
they have huge wings, and so the shaping on the Tekdapter is designed to just accommodate those bindings. And because there's no real way to put a pin where it needs to be without doing something crazy like this and maintaining that universality. So, and we've used photogrammetry for this. Nowadays there's all these like crazy handheld 3D scanners coming onto the market, but I still use photogrammetry techniques. And if anybody's not familiar, that's like just using a camera and some free software to to generate these 3D meshes. And I found that with the correct settings, like if you're careful with the settings and use a good camera and all that, you can get some absolutely. I mean, these are a little bumpy. Like it'd be kind of hard to like, they're not ready to like go 3D print directly from the scan data, but they never really are. But like as far as like where stuff is located in space and its relevancy to like the heel of the binding and all that, it's very accurate, and so it worked
Yeah.
just fine
Oh, that's
for that, and it was dead free. It didn't cost us a thing, and that's another thing is like we're a two-man business that has been able to succeed and like grow in challenging times, and that's why is because we seek like low-cost solutions and implement stuff like. But that doesn't mean that it's bad quality. It just means that it was done, inexpensively and with like savvy approaches,
Yep.
instead of just like
Yeah.
wasteful, just dump money at it and stuff like that. So yeah, those are like the Tekdapters, and here's just some more random sketches, kind of some cool stuff. I don't know, playing with the iPad and everything.
And you
Little,
guys just now currently working on making improvements to the Tekdapters, or like, are you guys working on a new product or anything like that?
yeah, we're working on a lot of stuff actually. It's been a busy time. It's been a really busy week. I'm kind of finally in this office space. I've always kind of been a basement worker. Had my home offices out of my basements usually, or something like that. And I have a family now, and that hasn't worked as well recently. Now that here, I'm gonna stop presenting and go back here. But now that I'm relocated here and got an office space here that I'm working on building out. It's been really good. It's really good to like get some things around here to distract me. And I'm glad we're doing this on a Sunday morning, which is nice because there is like a lawn care place next door, and they've been running heavy equipment lately with the spring, so it would have been kind of annoying. So this is a good time to do this. But yeah. So yeah, we're working on. I don't know how much I can't really say too much, but yeah, we're working on some pretty exciting stuff. Adapter improvements and stuff like that. That's always kind of an ongoing thing. We're really looking to address our current Daymakers bottom out at a 275 boot sole length, and that's been there's just no solutions in the ski touring industry for anybody with a boot that small and beneath that. And those are the main, that's something that ski boot manufacturers need to address. There's just no good solutions for real skiers with a smaller boot, or at least very limited options. So that's something we hear a lot, and we're looking to hopefully, address as we kind of move forward and update things. So, and then, I don't know, see what you got. You got any? What else you got for me here on the day?
I know we want to hop into Project Vaughn here in a little bit, but just for anybody that's interested in exploring like the two solutions that you guys have, what would your ideal, I don't want to say customer, who is your ideal fit for which product? I think I'm actually moving to Colorado here in a couple of months, probably looking to find
nice.
Daymaker Classics actually, so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, just for who is Daymaker Classic for versus who are the Tekdapters for?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's one we also get a lot, and like I said, that's the thing, is that's the one that's been challenging as a small team, especially with hey, working out of a basement or something. There's not really an office to bring talent to hire folk. And so, we have been pretty lean in our operations, and there's always things hey, we need an article of who all is better. And I've written this out in emails to folks, and just consolidating into an online doc on the page is one of those things that's been on our to-do list for years. But it breaks down real easy. So a Daymaker Classic is, it works with any ski boot, grip walk, alpine sole, a race boot, anything like that. And so there's nothing that's going to, other than maybe a frame binding, which people don't really want to use. And so there's no real options to tour with a boot like that. And so for anybody that's got, or maybe a custom boot, like a Dale boot, or a Surefoot, or a Fisher vacuum boot or something like that that's been heavily customized and worked on. I don't want to redo my boots just to get a new touring setup,
Yeah.
Or at least not for resort touring or anything. And because once you put all that work into a pair of boots, it's a lot of work. And so for folks like that, it's a no-brainer for the Daymaker. People that are wanting to get into touring and just try it, they've already got skis and everything. Obviously, it's a great way to get started and test the waters. It's by far the lowest cost option out there, other than just buying garage sale equipment. And so for those, right there, it's getting into it, got a kind of a custom boot situation, or not looking to buy a walk mode boot or anything like that, because the 4-bar Tech is really, really good at walking with a non-walk boot. It just the way it pivots, normally when you tour on a system that doesn't have that linkage, you really are stressing your quads, and it kind of and your calves and everything. Every time you take that step forward, it's a real strain on your calf. And so with the 4-bar Tech, it really works kind of in a different manner, and it's much more conducive. So anybody like that, it's or people that are looking to go hit jumps on park skis or stuff like that, or all mountain kind of twin tip kind of skis that aren't really not gonna want to set up with something with a lighter weight binding in it. So all those kind of folks make sense. It's really good for traveling. People going to Japan a ton. January is madness around here, because everybody's trying to get a pair of Daymakers before they go to Japan next week. And we're dude, you and everybody else a couple months earlier, please, or a couple weeks earlier at least. So that's always madness. But it's really good for that, because you, instead of having a whole other set of skis and a whole other set of boots you're trying to fly with, it's an adapter and a pair of skins. So, and the Tekdapter fills that role also, but it's typically, so really the Daymaker Classic is kind of just super universal, and the Tekdapter is a way more just high performance touring solution. It's right there performance wise with any of the hybrid bindings out there and everything like that, but it's completely detached from your ski when you're not touring, and that is an advantage that I think is sometimes not fully understood, because the Tekdapter with the pin interface is really low friction, and it's super low weight compared. It's probably in the base form, it's about, so the standard Daymaker is 760 grams. I don't know if I have that right. Maybe 730 grams a foot, and give or take. I don't have the numbers in front of me. And then the Tekdapter is 530. So it's a good chunk lighter, and you really feel that between the lower friction, and then you have a boot that's got inserts in it, so it's probably lighter weight and has a walk mode. And so the whole system becomes quite a bit more, really opens up some performance there. But then we also provide some upgrade paths where you can order a full fixed carbon fiber pole set. And so we explored making the telescopic poles out of carbon fiber, but that only saved a few grams. And so just deleting all of the telescopic elements, and kind of like that sketch that I showed that was like one size only, you delete all of that and you're like, hey, these are mine. I'm going to set them to my boots. You can set them up with a fixed pole like that, and it saves like 100 grams per foot. So, now you're on like a 400 gram setup per foot, and they weigh nothing at that point. And they're designed so that they nest together and pack up more compactly in your bag. And then, so it's a lot less universal as far as like you really need to have the right boot. And one thing we also hear a lot of times is people like, oh, why would I buy those? I could just buy a shift or a tech setup and stuff. And it's like, you have both. Most people who have a Tekdapter have a lightweight setup, or coming off one of these other hybrid bindings and just are really looking for that full-blown downhill performance that they're missing. It's very rarely that somebody's buying a Tekdapter as their first ski touring product. So the Tekdapter really kind of is like a little bit nichier, but really kind of like a pro-grade tool, where the Daymaker Classic is just like the bread and butter kind of option. So
yeah. And then, I don't know if you're alluding to it or not, but I think like one of the big things that makes both solutions stand out is the fact that you can take out the adapters before you go downhill. Obviously, there are a large number of injuries that occur in the backcountry just because of the way current bindings are set up, whether they be a hybrid or like full touring bindings. But like that was the thing that really stuck out to me the most from our last conversation, was like the increase in safety and then like downhill performance, where you can actually ski in like a regular alpine boot, which is a lot safer and a lot easier to ski on.
Yeah, for sure. As somebody with a jacked up knee, safety has always been something I'm trying to like help. I don't want other people to have to deal with this. It sucks. Yeah, and so whenever I'm like skiing and I see people like skiing all over the resort with pin bindings, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, they just don't realize what the risk they're taking, because you don't blow your knee doing something. Sometimes you do, but most of the time it's stupid. It's like not the crazy fall that blows your knee. So tech bindings in general are just not going to have the same kind of safety characteristics, and even alpine bindings really aren't that safe. It didn't work for me, and it's but they're better. How many other people do we all know that have blown knees and stuff like that? It's a huge problem. But at least it's better. And a alpine binding has elastic travel, and if you've skied all the different bindings out there, you'll notice that certain bindings have very different feels. A Giray versus an FKS versus an STH, very different, boot to ski feel. And how much vibration is absorbed versus transmitted, and so there's all these different performance, not variables, but it's not like the binding is not a static element on the ski and the boot system. It is constantly moving while you're skiing, and if you take that away, it really changes the way you ski. So the Daymakers, and again, let's say you buy hybrid binding and you're not touring, you're skiing the resort, you're dealing with it. Maybe it's not as robust as that typical binding you'd ride, or maybe it's heavier than something you'd ride, or higher up, or something like that. It's got some compromises in the day-to-day resort skiing mode, and so you're kind of like, you're not really getting the full performance of that setup there, and it's isolated, and these things are expensive. So a Daymaker, whether it be the Tekdapter or the Classic, is, we know it's a heavier system overall. It's obviously a heavier system, and it's higher up and stuff like that. But what it does is it completely isolates touring as a function from your ski setup. And so when you're not skiing, you don't have anything touring related. There's no inserts, there's no intermediary things you got to go take to a shop to get mounted or anything like that. And so you're completely like not touching your skis at all until you want to go uphill. And, again, our customers and this is Giray is he's getting more and more into like ski mountaineering and stuff like that, like big hardcore objectives. And a lot of people who are looking for our product are not looking for a ski mountaineering setup. They're looking to just go ski side country and, what's available thereby. And so, I think a lot of folks sometimes don't see that there's those different use cases for a product like this, outside of just full-blown, ski-mo in the Alps kind of mode. So So yeah, so they're both. I hope does that kind of answer some of
Yeah,
that? And,
oh, for sure.
and yeah,
No,
the
I
other
just
thing too.
wanted
Oh,
to
we were
make
talking about
sure.
safety. One thing that we noticed that became unfortunately clear to us as a safety element with the adapters is hearing stories, especially out in Utah, of like people getting swept away in avalanches on the uphill, where they're touring uphill and their bindings are locked out because they're skinning uphill, and then you get caught in an avalanche and now you've got you're anchored by your skis, and they found that a lot of those cases, that's what was a deciding factor in people getting buried deeper. And anything like our adapters are, you're in the releasable binding, but we've also taken steps with like the geometry of the heel lugs so that your binding is not actually all the way clamped down, because we found that wouldn't actually release, and that it's kind of already pre-released a little bit to make it actually be able to pop off. And you know we weren't specifically designing for that avalanche situation, more so just people falling forward when they're ski touring, slip. But, it was one of those things we kind of, just like kind of the ergonomics that become visible over time, is that, hey, going uphill, God forbid something like that happened, you would have at least, that releasability characteristic built into the system. Same time with the downhill too. It's like if you got to ski high consequence features or something like that, if you aren't sure that it's going to do what you need it to do, it's same kind of thing, right? From the other or pre-releases or something like that.
Yep.
So
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of safety considerations make when you're going out in the backcountry. It seems like Daymakers
yeah,
attacked it from a lot of different angles, which is really cool.
yeah, and it's a sketchy place to be taking extra chances. It's like,
Yeah.
but
I
hey, we definitely acknowledge it's like different tools for different cases. It's like we're not trying to replace a tech setup. So they definitely have their, they're great for what they're great at. And so yeah, just solving the use case that's maybe right next door that was getting missed.
For sure. For sure. Well, cool. I think there maybe that's it for Daymakers. Well, yeah, so that was it for the Daymaker touring section of this interview with Chris. Pretty awesome stuff that he got to introduce, take us into a deep dive into Daymaker touring, the genesis of the idea, all the way through to the successful business that they are now. Also gave us some awesome insight into the engineering behind the product and how they were able to really be resourceful using photogrammetry from smartphones to create a cheap 3D like a cheap affordable 3D model that ended up with a product that is widely used by thousands of skiers today. So yeah, very grateful for the first part of that interview. Stay tuned for part two coming soon, where Chris introduces Project Fawn. I won't spoil the surprise, but it's something that um, you can get involved with um, pretty soon here. So we'll see you next time.